Hey.
Good afternoon, good evening even. Welcome to the studio this evening. We're going to be doing some pyrography, which is creating images with heat. Question is, what's the image? The image is probably going to be something like this. I must have a look, see if I can find the reference image for this. But this is an airbrush image that was done a long time ago. It's one of the first ones I ever did with an airbrush. So I kind of figured I'd have a go at doing the same image but with pyrographic techniques, and I've actually just seen some stuff in this image that I didn't finish, obviously. So that's going to be the reference image, and I'm going to just do a pencil representation of it if I can, just to give me the main outline, which I'll then use a tracing technique to put down onto the wood itself, rather than drawing directly on the wood. That way I keep a lot of pencil marks off of the wood, which can sometimes be hard to erase, and then they get burnt into the wood and they become visible, which is not something I'm after. So I shall put that to one side where I can refer to it and say good evening to Fluffy Twiglet. Good evening, Fluffy Twiglet. Welcome to tonight's studio stream. Pyrography, after a little bit of hand drawing. Well, drawing. Train drawing rather than hand drawing. I could draw hands, but I want to do a train. Nuddlechen, good evening. Welcome to the studio this evening. So the train, rule of thirds, down the middle. I've done it a little bit on the original, it's a bit long, so I'm just going to do is sort of give myself some sort of rough marks on this paper. I'm not too bothered about just what I do on this paper because I'll use it to trace. So I can rub out, I can draw over the top of each other and do all sorts of things on there. So the train itself roughly will sit within there. It probably won't go any further than about there. And you're not seeing that very well, are you, because of the lighting? Well, let me just see if I can adjust the lighting. No, that's not going to help much, but I'll get a little bit more harder with the pencil in a moment. I'm just mapping out roughly where things probably want to be. Things moving, it's a good idea to leave them somewhere to go in an image. So rather than filling the whole page, leave a little bit of a gap at one end so that whatever you're doing can move into that gap. Which is why I've just put a mark roughly down there. Now this is a monorail, so we're looking up at it as well, so we've got a perspective on it, and it's sat on a monorail, what they actually call the beam, or the beam in this particular case. And whilst what I'm going to do is I'm going to put on the bottom of the beam about there. I don't want too much at the bottom. I don't mind sort of more sky, but I don't actually want too much at the bottom because that's ideally just trees and things. So first question, do I want to look straight up at it? Do I want a little bit of perspective or a little bit of angle on this? I've got a little bit. Let's do a little tiny bit. So these are all the sorts of things that I start thinking about when I create a pyrographic image to start with. And also we've got to remember pyrographic is black and white, so it's brown and white, but it's a monochrome image. So we've got the bottom of the beam about there, top of the beam, which of course will be hidden by the do you call it a train? I don't know quite what you call it, but the thing that's riding the monorail. So it's going to be roughly that sort of diameter, sort of height, I think. Is that a bit? That's probably a bit short, so we'll make it a bit longer, or a bit taller really. That's a useful bit, you see, because I'm going to trace this. I can just ignore that line. We will see the underneath of it as we're looking up. It'll be quite a dark area underneath. And now then, this thing, the original had a pillar which supports the beam on which the train is riding. Probably won't put it in, but we shall see. What it does have is a in this particular image, it's got a pan underneath the track, because this is Disneyland, Disney World. The train is running over the top of people, so you don't want oil or anything dropping on them, so it's got a pan underneath, which I'm going to put in because it two reasons. One is it adds a little bit more to the image, but it also fills up this bottom bit a bit as well. So it's really just a geometric shape. Yeah, about that much. Lots of lines so far, not a lot of drawing, but we'll get to that. This is just, as I say, just working out lines. So now then, what I've got to be able to do with this is to sort of indicate it's probably a bit sort of like this. The shape, if you like, by putting in the like joins, and I can apply shading as well when this is done with the pyrography. That's probably a little bit about there. Like that. You can start to see some of the shapes now in his trains. Yeah, well, I just happened to like the image. I don't know if you saw it at the start, but I just happened to like the image. They tend to be sort of streamlined and look, you know, purposeful. You know, that was as I say, from a holiday in Disneyland, Disney World, whichever one it is in Florida, I can't remember. And it was you know, it's a nice image with that thing going over the top of your head. So we then have the carve itself. So we're going to start from about there. That's probably a bit there. Okay, so we've got the nose, which comes around and then goes down the body. Okay. The trick is going to be to get the smooth curves. On this, that's usually, if you can get the smooth curves, it helps. That wants to be a bit steeper than that, so we'll go back a little bit further. Let's go a bit closer to that. There we go, something like that. So we're just more or less putting in the main lines on this. So somewhere right about here we get the side skirt of the train, which is going to come down and sit over the beam. When it's inside this side skirt, where there's wheels on the side which stop it from falling off the beam, basically, which is a roughly straight line, which I should actually do with a ruler, but I'm not going to. Now I want this to actually look quite curved. TMJ72, TMJT, sorry, 72 from Australia. You're up at 5 AM in the morning. If you're up at 5 AM in the morning just to watch me, thank you very much. That's most dedicated of you. No, it is a train. It is, or was, a train that was at I don't know whether it's Disney World or Disneyland. Disney World, thank you. The monorail at Disney World in Florida. a number of years ago, because I think they've changed them a little bit, and it's I'm actually working from an airbrush painting, one of the first airbrush paintings I ever did, and I just felt like, because I saw it the other day, I was talking to 3D Bloke, who is an airbrush artist on Twitch, and I can't remember the discussion, but I happened to get it out to show, and I looked at it and I thought, I tell you what, I'd like to have another go at that in some medium, and that's what this is. That noise will stop in a moment. There we go.
Why is it ringing like that?
Excuse me a minute while I fix this. Okay, I am back. Sorry about that. Telephone's ringing and not ringing properly, and not anyway. Sorted out. Yeah. So what I was saying was, this is the monorail from Disney, whatever I said it was, in Florida. That was the image. So I'm just working to see if I can reproduce that in Pyrography. That nose is a lot longer than I've drawn here. In fact, it's probably not quite as tall. That's probably what looks a little odd, so I shall just shorten that a little bit. Yeah, so the side skirt is going to, that's around about there. So all I'm doing is just roughing out the shape, and then what I'll do is then transfer the outline to the wood, and then we'll use pyrographic from there. But for sort of this roughing out, it's a lot easier to do it on paper. I can rub it out, and if I do that on the wood, it's not as easy to rub out, and the pencil marks tend to get cooked into the pyrography, so it doesn't actually, you start to see when you're doing the pyrography, if you go over the top of a pencil mark, it fixes it in place, and then sometimes you can see it, which doesn't look necessarily very good. A line about there. So I just want to get this one line, so that's not quite parallel to that, but is still a nice smooth curve. About like that. Yeah, slightly higher, probably about that. Like that, yeah, and then we will get some, you know, we will put some of the livery on the top of it, so that'll come down like that and across there, and that'll stop somewhere around there, and we'll have a window which is effectively somewhere, oops, like that. I like that top one a bit better, but we'll go somewhere around about there for a window. I'll take that off the side. That's the main elements. Just about anything else from that we can do on the now what would Fluffy Twiglet be doing? Probably something to do with a scrapbook, I think. I think that's fairly obvious, isn't it? That nose looks a bit short when I'm looking on the camera. I like the shape, but it looks somewhat. We need to go. The camera is useful in this particular case because it's giving me a view which is kind of like stepping back. That probably is rather than actually physically getting up and stepping back. Yeah, looks like I need a little bit more, just a little bit more of a longer nose on this. That looks a bit better. I look at a photograph of them. Photography, okay. Well, this train has quite a streamlined, or had quite a streamlined look. So I want to just make sure I incorporate that sort of really sort of streamlined, well, bullet train sort of look that it's got. So that's probably okay round about there. Right, I think that will do. So the next thing is a bit of wood, which I have here. What we'll then do is we'll trace down onto this bit of wood, but what I'm just going to do is just give this wood a little bit of a sand down. If I can get hold of this sandpaper. I don't need to use a block or anything on this. I'm not particularly being very aggressive in this sanding. It literally is only just knocking the surface down slightly, which will result in a better pyrographic image when I do it. So this is relatively rough. It's probably about 800 grit actually, sandpaper. So I don't need to smooth the surface as such. I am literally just well, it is smoothing the surface, but the fibres just stood up slightly. That just knocks the top off them. Sits and it makes the pyrographic image when you come over the top of it a lot smoother if I do that first. And then I get rid of the small amount of dust that I've just created off of it. So I thought I'd show you, peppering the wood as well, because that is what I normally would have done off stream, but just to give that a surface. Oh, I didn't realise it was that loud, Fluffy Twiglet, sorry. Yeah, next thing I need is some trace down paper. So this isn't exactly carbon paper, but it's not exactly not. Similar sort of idea. Now then, what I should do first before I do that is find myself a little bit of tape. Okay, so just a small amount of masking tape. And what I'm going to do is use this to just hold the top of the, get rid of this for the moment, line that up on the wood roughly where I want it. I'm just going to drop a little bit of masking tape over there. So what this does is this fastens that to the wood in roughly the same position. That means if I move it to have a look and see whether the tracing has gone through, for example, I can put it back in almost the same position. Luckily it's A4 anyway, and the board is A4, so I could just lay it on top, but it just makes life a bit easier. Put that over there, I'll use it, put it back later. So I'm going to use, there's various colours available in this stuff. This is particularly, it's called Sorrel paper. As I say, it's wax free, which is useful for most art projects, because you know, if you're airbrushing or something like that, for example, you don't want wax around. You know, paint, for example, of course, tends to just skip off wax. Even acrylic paint, which you use to paint wax. So this, but it's not carbon, you know, traditional carbon paper either. So now then, this is now just a matter of tracing, putting the lines back. And this should then transfer down onto the wood. Now the transfer stuff will rub out with an eraser, and I will sort of use an eraser before I go over it with the pyrographic machine. As I say, if you leave it in place, it tends to cook in, and then you can see it in the final image, which isn't always ideal. Don't need to be fantastically precise about this, it's only an indication for me to use. Right, so I will almost reinterpret this as I do it on the wood itself later. Somewhere around there. I didn't. Sometimes one of the tricks is this: if it can sometimes be really hard to draw a full curve. I wasn't quite on the line there. One of the sort of tricks is if you do like dotted lines, you're more likely to stay on the curved line that you're trying to trace. And there again, sometimes you'll be completely off it. I like that line better. Let's go down there somewhere. Now what I can do, you see, is I can just tip that up. Excuse me covering the camera. And then if I can get hold of this black stuff, I can just flip. Yeah, of course, as you can see, there's nothing there. You know why? Upside down. I've just traced onto the back. Now I get to do it again. Basically anything fluffy twiggler, animals mainly, cats, that sort of thing, but just anything that interests. Put that line in there. Why not? I'd laugh at it, to be honest. Yeah. I've just forgotten what line I did. Did I do that line? No. I'll tell you what, let's check I'm actually... Yeah, it's going down on the wood this time. It looks a bit like a magnet train. It does a bit, yes, but this one isn't. It's not a maglev. It actually runs on tyres. So... technically speaking, it is a normal train, a monorail train. Runs on a concrete beam. I just kind of like the aerodynamic. I mean, it doesn't go fast, so the aerodynamics is just purely aesthetic. You know, they were, when they built this thing, they were after something that looked futuristic. And I think they achieved it, so... Right, yeah, I did put that one in up there. Right, so now I get to do these lines again. I think I decided I want it somewhere slightly between the two drawn here. Okay, now it's there. Yeah, that looks about okay. So I can put this away now before it gets torn or lost. That is assuming I can, there it is, find the package it came in. Oh dear. He's a wizard, Harry. Yeah. Well, I hope it does look awesome at the end. We shall see, but that's, you know, it's nice if it does. Harry Potter. Yeah, I don't mind Harry Potter. I can only, well, I've read the books once, and that's about as far as I don't particularly want to read them again. But yeah, and Back to the Future. I remember those, but they're old. That's an old film, though. Is Back to the Future? Yes, I can. The inside ones, the purple ones inside that dragon scale are 19 gauge 3/16 or millimeters. They're a 1 millimeter wire diameter, 5 millimeter internal diameter of the ring, and the larger ones I think are 18 gauge, quarter inch, which is, what's it say there, 1.2 millimeter wire diameter and 6.6 millimeter internal diameter of the ring itself. And I've no idea who he is, Fluffy Twiglet. I don't remember actors' names. Oh dear. I can remember the odd one, shall we say, but I don't remember actors' names. I just enjoy the film, or otherwise. Right. I suppose it would be a good idea at this point to actually get out a pyrographic machine. Now that is something I should have done before I started the stream, and I was thinking of doing it and then completely forgot. Quite how I can forget to get a pyrographic machine out to do a pyrographic stream. I don't know. Luckily, the studio is quite small, which means it's just behind me. So let me just untangle wires. And then I shall plug it in, because that'll be the other thing I'd forget to do, is to forget to plug it in. And you know, logic says what I should have done at that point is check it was turned off before I plugged it in, but yeah, luckily it is. And that's the other pen that I have. I am just wondering whether I want to get out a... I've got a writing tip on the end of here at the moment. That's quite useful for just dotting in lines, so that I don't rub them out, so to speak. But I am just wondering what I've done with the other tip. There they are. So I've got a small studio. You wouldn't think I could lose stuff. It's very easy. So I need the possibility of both these shaders. So we'll get them out now. I don't need that piece of paper anymore. I'll put it over here just in case. Find somewhere to put a glass of water. Is that the way? Right. To misuse a quote from another film, heat 'em up. We'll turn it on, and we'll turn that right down and switch over to that tool. Oh, that's an interesting one actually, a steam engine. Yeah, it would, I suppose it's vaguely sort of browny red at that point, but yeah, one of the steam engines would be interesting. He plays snap. Oh, okay. What kind of surprised me in a way was some of the people that were in the film. I didn't recognise them, even though they're well-known actors. You sort of suddenly realise afterwards, or you see something afterwards, and you go, "Oh, I didn't know he was in it or she was in it." And when they tell you who they were, you know, so you don't recognise them with the clothes on, type of thing, you know, in normal life. You suddenly sort of, you know, see them in normal clothes, and you don't recognise them as being in the film. It's quite an interesting phenomenon. Right. Okay, so okay, that tip's cool enough for this. So what I'm just going to do is, yeah, most of this is going to be dark enough to actually apply a rough outline. So in fact, this tip is still a bit too hot. So what I'm just going to do now is just use this writing tip, again like a pencil, just to put some outlines in, and then I'll gradually just erase the trace marks. And because with this particular one, what I can really do is I can outline it. If you're doing something like a portrait, for example, I wouldn't tend to outline things because people don't have outlines around them. You create the outline by the shading, and to some extent it's the same here on this train, but as long as I keep this outline quite light, then it will hide itself, if you see what I mean. So you will see me spin this board around quite a bit as well. It's always easier to do curves, especially using the inside arc of your arm. You can get them a lot smoother that way. And now that I'm actually doing some work on this, I'm going to switch my glasses, because I've kind of done it again. I started with my normal sort of day-to-day glasses, and it's a lot better to use reading glasses for this. It's even better if everything that's on the desk doesn't fall on the floor. Right. And I shall endeavour not to knock the face cam all over the place whilst I'm doing this as well. We do have white stripes on this, but the white stripe is bordered by colour, so again that won't be a problem. When these trains were around, as I think they've replaced them with a newer model, but they were all individually coloured as well. The one I represented here was red, there was blue, yellow, green, purple. There's at least 5 or 6 different colours. Each train had its own colour. So, right, I can do some erasing now, or a little bit of it. Where's my paintbrush? When you erase on something like this, and I forgot, use a brush to brush the erased bits away, not your finger, because what happens is you push them in to the wood and smudge it, and then you get a dark area on the wood. If you're not careful, you get dark marks like that as well, which are caused because when you're not the wood conducts the heat off the tip of the tool, and so when you have it in mid-air like this, it heats up. So when you put it down on the, I'm doing it again, when you put it down on the piece of wood, that heat is suddenly conducted into the wood and turns it browner than you want. Whereas when it's on the wood itself, the wood is conducting the heat away all the time, so it doesn't heat up that hot to get brown. So I just blow on the tip, which cools it down enough so that I can put it down on the wood and not get that immediate brown spot. Now let's see if this time I can remember to not brush the stuff away with my hands. One useful thing as well when you're working on wood and you're erasing like that, erase in line with the grain of the wood, because the pencil tends to sit on top of the grain. If you erase across the grain, you again tend to push the pencil or the mark, whatever's created the mark, into the grain, which is then, because it's kind of in a valley, it's quite hard to erase. So you erase it in line with the grain. Now at this point I am trying to be quite smooth with the curve. What I can do is go very, when I come to shade this, if you like, go slightly outside the line to smooth it out if I've made any sort of major errors. But it's whilst I'm outlining at this point, it's a good idea to try and get the final smooth curve if I can. can see this is a writing tip, and I can use it almost literally like a pencil. And just like a pencil, if you go over it multiple times, it gets darker. What I'll then do is go down the length and just erase it in sections and then outline it. Now I could do this, if I had a metal ruler, I could put a metal ruler on there and just go down it with a metal ruler, but because of course although the metal ruler will absorb some of the heat from the tool, I don't want a lot on the wood, so that wouldn't be particularly detrimental, and I can compensate for that if necessary by actually turning the heat up. But whilst I do have a metal ruler, it's somewhere. Right, so if the people who are watching don't understand what's going on, apart from the obvious fact that it says so on screen, you feel free to ask any questions if you want about pyrography, or for that matter any of the other crafts, but this one that you're looking at, as it says, is pyrography. So we're just doing the initial stages here of creating the image on the canvas, so to speak. I generally prefer to get some sort of outline down on the wood if I can at the start, rather than working totally blind. And by that I mean you just start as you would do on a piece of paper, start and just draw without any sort of preparation beforehand. It can be done. I do that sometimes, I did that sometimes with airbrushing, but it's a bit easier to correct those than it is with pyrography. Okay, so that's that top outline, roughly. I think I've dipped off a little bit at that end, but that's not too much of a problem. You can just see it roughly there. It's a little bit more prominent to me, but I don't need it to stand out really strong at this stage. It's quite convenient. There is a very slight bow on this piece of wood, which kind of puts a pivot right in the middle, which is quite useful for spinning it around. One of the reasons for using plywood actually is to stop that bow. If this was a solid piece of wood and I covered all of this in pyrography, as it will ultimately sort of turn out, it would tend to make the wood curl upwards, and plywood, the makeup of plywood, which is what I'm using, tends to resist that. So it's one of the I'm kind of using, I have had people say, using cheap wood, it's the best wood for the job rather than solid wood, and indeed it is. Actually, getting good quality plywood isn't cheap. It is actually potentially cheaper to get solid wood. Now, whilst I'm doing this, I'm also noting that certain bits of the wood are taking heat a little bit more strongly than other bits. The areas are not particularly surprising to me that are doing it. Some of the slightly darker areas are not taking the colour quite as readily, but that's as I say, it's something I'm now starting to get used to with this particular wood, which is a birch plywood. But all in all, this particular plywood is reacting really nicely so far, which I'm pleased about. Okay, I think we can take that all the way to the nose. Let me spin that, look at it from the other side. The answer to that, Fluffy Twiggler, is yes. I shall explain. There's really sort of 3.5-4 ways to control the heat and therefore the colour. There's literally how much electricity I pass through the tip. More electricity, the hotter the tip becomes, and therefore when it's on the wood it applies more heat, and therefore the brown effect arrives quicker. I can slow down, so if I do something really fast, very little heat gets applied to any one particular space. If I slow down, more heat gets applied. And to some extent, pressing harder within certain constraints means that more heat is getting applied. A, because you're moving slightly slower, and B, you've got a slight better contact with the wood, and therefore you are applying more heat. The third way of doing it is to keep going over the same spot, so that you raise the heat, and then you add a little bit more heat, and you add a little bit more heat as you keep going over it. And in practice, you use sort of a combination of all three. just whatever feels better at the time. You're probably seeing me going over this some areas 2 or 3 times. That tends to be easier for the way I prefer to work, because I can do it and go, I need a bit more heat to just go a little bit browner, and I can keep building it up slowly. If I go too slow, then there is a danger that I will overcook it. It'll go too brown too quickly, and it's harder to back off. That wants to be roughly yeah. I suppose in a way it's a bit like, well, that technique of going over it multiple times is a bit like you would do with a pencil if you wanted something to get darker. I know with a pencil you can just press harder. That doesn't quite work, except if you, as I say, consider that if you press harder you have to go slower, and therefore you apply more heat. Try my best not to get these dark spots which you get from having a tool which is too hot when you touch the wood. Jasper 5020, it's going well, thank you very much. And so is this piece, which I am quite pleased about. How are you doing? In some ways I kind of wish I, like you get for soldering irons, I had a temperature control tip, which would be quite nice. So, but it would have to react really fast, and things like soldering irons don't. With temperature control I wouldn't actually need to keep blowing on the tip like you're seeing me do. Because as soon as I lift it off the wood, it would recognise it's getting too hot and turn the heat down. It's on wood, yeah, as Fluffy Twiglet's saying. You can do pyrography on paper. It can be hard or challenging, shall we say, to do it on paper. If you do use thick paper though, it's a heck of a lot easier. If you use the sort of paper I was drawing, photocopy paper for example, it's, well, I guess a really talented or a really skilled pyrographer could do it on photocopy paper, but it would take a heck of a lot of skill. You char through the paper in nothing flat. But on thick paper, sort of thin card almost, you can do it. And I do have some sort of very thick paper which I occasionally just have a play about with. I've not actually tried to do a full piece on it yet, but it's useful just to try and practice certain things on. It's a bit cheaper than wood to buy, so. And that is exactly all the same techniques apply. There's no difference. It just takes less heat than it would do on wood. Same if you're doing materials like a gourd or leather. It's just the same techniques work. It's just a different degree of heat is required. So either turn it up, wait longer, or whatever. depending on the effect. Okay. No, Jasper, not cool, it's hot. Sorry, that's the standard pyrographic joke, I guess. I've got a new light coming, hopefully sometime this week, which I hope will be a bit better than this. I'm getting quite a bit of glare off of it, which actually can make it a little bit difficult to do this, because the wood reflects quite a bit of the light back. So sometimes I can't exactly see what I'm doing, which is why you'll see me often sort of just moving my head sort of to one side, or sort of leaning forward or something like that, just so I can avoid the glare. No, actually, I am pleased to say that is something I've never done, Jasper. It's I'm using it like you see, I'm using it like a pencil, so I've no particular reason to have this hand anywhere near the tip, so that would be the hand that would get it. This one doesn't. It sometimes does get uncomfortable, shall we say. This is a heating element, obviously, that's why it's hot, and at some of the higher heat settings, especially if I'm working like vertically like this, then the heat is obviously coming up the outside. It also comes through the body of the pen, but it sort of comes up the outside, and it does get warm, shall we say, and get to the point of being uncomfortable where you have to go, okay, I'm just going to let my fingers cool off. Never actually burnt myself. It becomes too uncomfortable before you get to that stage. It's a bit like having your fingers over a candle, really. At some point, you just don't keep them there till they get that hot. But yeah, I also have a respect, if you like, for the tools, and when I'm not using this tool, it gets turned off. So they cool down really quickly as well. They also heat up really quickly, but so when I'm not, when I put it back on its stand, it's I can turn it off and I don't make accidental contact with it then either. It's the same when I do the carving. I don't. I've never actually cut myself. Not whilst I've been carving. I've caught my finger when I've been putting chisels away in their bag, but I've never actually caught myself while I've been carving. Okay, so that's that one in place. We'll do the bottom of the side skirt. It would actually be ideal potentially if I did this using actually using an easel, so I could tip it up slightly. And that's as I do have one sat next to me. I can might try that on one of the streams, because the camera mount that I've got here will allow me to do, you know, to position the camera so you can see, so that won't be a problem. Yeah. That's true. Always respect the tools, look after them, respect them for what they are. They're sharp or hot or whatever, but as long as you remember they're not toys and they can harm you, then generally speaking you're okay. Art toys. What sort of art toys, Fluffy Twiglet? Toys are always nice, but not always necessary. And they always look really, really interesting to play with and things like that. I quite often, when I'm in something like an art shop or place like that, I'll be looking at pencils and pens just because they're pretty colours, or they've got nice fine tips, or there'll be something about them. And I'll spend hours just looking at them. Mainly trying to persuade myself not to buy them. Distress inks I've never heard of. Chameleon pens, I'm assuming that's what I would perhaps call flip paint, where depending on the angle you look at it you get a different colour. Distress ink sounds a bit like crackle paint to me, but I'm not sure it is. Whilst as you can see me going over a line, there is a technique that you have to use in pyrography. It's a similar one to the one they use in airbrushing, and that is when you make contact with the wood, don't stop moving, because if you do, you get a brown mark. And most people, when they touch a pyrographic pen down, stop moving, or rather they put it down then start moving, and that's enough to cause quite a dark mark. So you have to do something which is very similar to airbrushing, where it's a bit like landing the pen, like you're landing a plane. You move, touch down, lift off, keep moving. So touch and go with the pen. and if you do that, you're less likely to create that blob, because you can maintain a constant speed through that. So when you've touched down, you're moving, you're immediately moving. You don't have to wait for your fingers to react to start moving. I kind of should practice more actual pencil and paper drawing as well. Not so much into permanent, like drawing with ink. You know, it's not so. I don't mind overlaying ink once the drawing's in place, but I'm not particularly one that wants to commit that heavily to start with when you're just starting the drawing. Okay, so that's actually the main outline of the train itself. Now the beam, and then the underpan, and then it's building it up from here. Okay, gradient pens. Brown Coat Captain, good evening. Welcome back. You're a pyrographer too. What sort of pyrography do you do? Don't see too many around. And when I come to do the beam, it's going to be interesting how to create a concrete texture. I have no idea. I had no idea when I started when I did the airbrush. I still no idea for airbrushing, but no idea how I'm going to do it with a pyro pen. Let's fade most of that out. If I fade most of it out, I can go over it. I don't mind cooking a little bit in, because I know the beam is going to be quite a strong colour. Yeah, you know that'll be okay, Fluffy Twiglet. Pocket the Rockets, hi, welcome. And especially if you stream it, that'd be great. And it's thank you. I bet I've got the wrong. Okay, Pocket the Rockets, thank you very much for following. That is most kind of you. I think I have. Yeah. Unfortunately, the graphic won't come up. The Twitch alerts won't come up. It's been a little while since I. Oh, it did. Oh, that was a bit delayed. I thought I'd changed that, and I hadn't changed it on this scene setting. So there you go. You get the airbrush welcome there. Thank you very much for following Pocket the Rockets. Oh, don't get too hung up on the burner that you're using, Brown Coat Captain. It's all pyrographic tools can produce well, I was going to say all styles. That's not I can't, for example, with this particular pen create stamps, stamped art. Sorry, with this particular burner, just because the tools I don't have, you can't. Without making them for myself, the tools don't come with a stamp type end on them. But all the other pyrographic tools can produce this style of art, which I call photographic style. So it's not about the tool. It really is about applying the heat properly. Now there are certain things that make other tools harder to do this sort of style of art with. Just as I mentioned, it's hard to do stamp style of art with this particular burner just because it doesn't have the right ends on it. I could make them, but I'd probably make it easier to go to a different style. But I've seen people, and you can see them on YouTube, you can see people creating pyrographic art with blowtorches and acetylene torches. So does it really matter? Okay, they're using bigger sheets of wood. That makes a difference. So it's not the tool. It's down to the skill in using whatever tool it is that you've got. And I'm assuming by you saying it's a beginner set, what I suspect you probably mean is it's a tool with a fairly large bulky handle and a silver barrel, and it's either got a stamp on the end or you can get like a conical tip on the end. They're perfectly usable for creating any style of art, pyrographic art. It has the advantage in some cases that there's a lot of heat in that tip, and so when you put it down on the wood it doesn't cool off as quickly, which gives you certain advantages. But that same advantage can be a disadvantage in that there's a lot of heat in the tip. So when you put it down on the wood, if you're not aware of it, you create really dark marks very quickly. But if you are aware of it and you're just brushing the tool over the wood, for example, you can create really fine light shades and lines. So it's not a beginner's tool, it's just aimed at a different style of art. Generally speaking, the beginner, what's marketed as beginners, usually has stamps. It'll be a heart shape, a diamond shape, a little tiny pussycat shape, or something like that for people to just brand wood with. But as I say, put a conical tip on it, you can do anything. Okay, that's a good idea. Let me just turn off that. What Fluffy Twiglet was talking about was this one, Salute to Sunset, which was one that was done on stream a little while ago now, which of course is an elephant. Whether it's an African or an Indian elephant, I'm not sure. I know it's got to do with the ears, but I can't remember which is which. So this may well be an Indian elephant on an African savannah, but and of course with the giraffe in the background. It's intended to be close to sunset, hence the dark background and the shadows. And if you like it, that's kind of a nice representation where the light is very orangey browny colour as well, which suits pyrography really nicely, does sunsets. And here of course the elephant is it's kind of like he's sort of waving at the last of the sunlight. So that's the last one we did. That goes in there somewhere. Since I'm showing off, might as well show off. There's a pussycat and a second pussycat. Junior and Felix. they do show up on the stream from time to time, as they feel like it. Neither of them can be persuaded to appear, they just turn up. And then one, I mean, they take a fair bit of time to do. Does anything? Does a pyrographic image, depending on the detail that you put into it. We did this on one stream, literally on one stream. So half of it was doing this image of a fox on the front, and the other half was doing that image of a sleeping fox on the back. Camera's a bit out of focus. Might have to refocus the camera. There we go, that's a bit clearer. Yeah, it is about the practice. So yeah, if you got a shading tip, a flat tip, a round tip, you might find your small sharp tip isn't as useful as you think it is, or think it might be. To use that effectively, you need to lay it down on its side. If you try and use the real sharp point, you probably end up digging more into the wood and creating a wider mark than you intend, or the heat will go out from the very tip too much, and you'll end up your natural reaction is to press harder when that happens, and so you'll start jamming it into the wood. So your very fine tip, I'd suggest leaving using that one until you've had more experience of using the thicker ones. There's no reason why you can't do very fine lines with a thick tip, or even you say you've got a flat shading tip, or even just a flat tip, because you can angle it to do fine lines, or use the edge of it, and you've got more control than usually over a very fine point. You have actually sanded down what, wood or your tips? I'd suggest if you can avoid sanding your pyrographic tips, do so, because usually they've got a copper core with a different coating on, and if you destroy I don't know what the actual, it's a bit like copper core with steel outer case, and if you sand the outer case away, the tips deteriorate really quickly. It's the same with when you're soldering, they do the same thing. Pocket the Rocket. Do I just stream pyrography? Nope, I don't. I stream 5 different crafts sequentially. Pyrography, scraper board, which is a board with china clay on the top and black ink, and you scrape the black ink away, leaving the white behind. You create the image by scraping that ink away in different ways and directions and shapes and patterns. Punchcraft, which is essentially using a really rather large needle to push loops of thread through material, creating what is effectively a miniature rug. And so the image is on, you work from the reverse, and the working side there's lots and lots of loops of thread, very much like, as say, a rug or a carpet. There is relief carving, so block of wood, hand chisels, removing wood to leave a piece which it's not for, generally speaking, I'm talking about relief carving, which is you'll have, let's say, a block of wood like this, and I would carve away to leave the train, if you like, on that block of wood, so it's sort of embedded in the block of wood. So 2.5 dimensions. So, or the other way of looking at it is you create the train, cut it in half, and stick half of it onto the block of wood, but it's made out of a single sheet. So relief carving and jewellery making. So generally speaking, using chainmail techniques, at least at the moment. So we create bracelets, necklaces, anything else that comes to mind. Okay, I shall turn this back on. I'll have a drink first. It's quite warm work. So generally speaking, it tends to be about well, the carving takes a bit longer, but 2 to 3 weeks on each of those, so just in a cycle. So we've just finished doing jewellery actually last night, so starting pyrography. Following this will be some carving of some kind. Right, so my next line is really difficult to see because of the lighting, but so I'll turn this on, and this tip's already hot, so I'll blow on it to cool it down. That's the only difference, brown coat Captain, with burners like this, is the heat up time is a heck of a lot quicker, and the cool down time is similarly quick, mainly because we don't have that big core heat. As I say, sometimes that is an advantage. What it means is you get a more consistent heat. If you saw me blow on this, and that is because when it's not on the wood, it gets hotter. As soon as I put it down, it creates a mark and cools off. With the bigger tools like you've got, when you put it down, it doesn't cool off. So you have to keep moving. But it means it doesn't cool off. So you can, with practice, get a more consistent line than I might just, unless I do as I did there, which is blow on it first, to take it to the working temperature. Now then, I did 5 short lines there because I want to rub some out. Yeah, I'm not sure whether I can. I'm not sure whether I can whether I can just go over them. If it's going to be a dark area anyway, cooking the pencil in, or the marking in, wouldn't really be a problem. But if they're not, and I'm not sure, then I don't necessarily want to cook that mark in, so I have to erase it first. Really, it can be really hard to do straight lines, so if you do them in short sections, then it tends to be a little bit easier to stay in a straight line. And in any case, of course, your arms, your fingers, your wrist all bend, so the more you move off a very short line, the more you tend to bend. So the shorter lines, segments, mean you can keep a line straight. Yep, we do things like that. Pocket the rockets. That's half finished because I've run out of rings. I need to order some more. But that's something called dragon scale. That's going to be a bracelet. It's literally about half finished. It must be about twice that length. And I'll just pull a couple more out and then get back on with things. But there was another one. That's a bracelet. No clasp on the end at the moment, but this is a sort of Christmas themed bracelet, green and red, in something called Persian weave, full Persian weave. And here's another sparkly piece, also a bracelet. can I recommend others? There's quite a lot around. Depends on the sorts of things that you're interested in. Poke Ranger 69, I think, is a glass artist, glass blower and artist. Yep, there you go. There's somebody who occasionally does pyrography is Cannon Bear. Well, he's doing a lot more drawing at the moment, I think. Oh, I'm trying to think now, because I just tend to, they're on the favourites list. Let me see if I can just pull up my favourites list and give you a couple. I mean, I don't know them all by any means, and okay, I've got to do this in a certain way, don't I? Following, there we go. See if I can remember some of these. You get Mr. Boombati, for example, who does chainmail. Generally he does armour based chainmail, but he does do jewellery from time to time. Who else do we have around here? 3D Bloke, who is an airbrush artist. He tends to stream just after I finish, but for some reason he's taking a break at the moment, but he tends to start at 10 o'clock at night, which is roughly when I finish, in about a quarter of an hour. There's a guy called See What Happens. He's making sculptures out of pipe cleaners. He's working on a couple of small pieces at the moment. Small. By small, I mean about 3 feet long pieces at the moment. I think one of them is some form of sword and a Minecraft skin, but he's also working on a piece. What is it? Oh, I can't remember the character now, but it's 5 foot tall. So here's another one. Artillery 84. He's an electronic artist. He's a good artist. JB Drawing. I've watched him quite a bit. Who else do we have around here? Oh, brain's gone. I'm trying to think now. Yeah, CJ Store 13. He does clay-based sculptures. And the Danish guy who is a leather crafter. Oh, there's quite a few. Oh, thank you. Yes, indeed. Santa NYE, who is an electronic artist. Just started streaming, so I think she's done 2 streams at the moment. So there's another name for you. And I'm now struggling to remember one more. That's yeah, Bubbles the Monkey. That was the one I was trying to remember. Who does fusible beads? This one has get called Perla or something similar. So she makes some really large pieces out of those. So, that's, if you're not familiar with it, it's a variation on pixel art. Yeah, but so there's a fair number for you. Essentially, though, just have a look round. There's always somebody on, and generally speaking, there's always something interesting to see. I have my own preference, which is for watching people, and you probably gathered from the list, watching people who do physical art like this. I have nothing against people who do electronic art. I'd say Artillery 84 was it, whichever one. I watch him. He's the one that actually got me watching creative in the first place. So you know, and it's but just look out for them. You get all sorts of people doing creating things like costumes for live action role play. There are people that do cooking streams. All sorts out there. Yeah, there's one. What's it? Eddie Fall guy who does chainmail as well. He tends to stream during the chainmail stuff during the day or Wednesday evening, but other times he streams games. But you may find you don't watch anything else now that you're starting to look into creative though. You'll fairly quickly discover the ones that you like to watch, or you know that you prefer to watch, or prefer not to. Yeah. How did I get into so many creative things? Not 100% sure how to answer that one. I have sort of done creative things all my life, but it's sort of been more technically creative, so like programming, for example, or stuff like that. Although I made models for flying models, aero modeler, in my younger days. So I've sort of been into sort of somewhat creative things. But it's now several years ago I built I decided I was going to build my next PC with a custom case, and I was going to do an airbrush case, and I did. And that's the machine I'm using at the moment now. It's painted to look a bit like an aquarium or an undersea view with fish. So that kind of got me into doing creative stuff, and then they've kind of just gone from there. I've seen stuff that looked interesting, wanted to try it, like with the jewellery, for example. I saw some streamers doing that chainmail stuff and thought, hey, that looks interesting. I'd like to try it. Had a go and found it to be interesting and wanted to carry on. And that's really just how it is. The carving was the same. Well, punchcraft, they all were along the lines of watching somebody do it and, you know, thinking that looks fun to do, and having a go, and then obviously just developing from there. I mean, I listed the 5 things we do on stream. That's not all I do or have done. I mentioned this is based on an airbrush, and I just mentioned airbrushing. That's something I do. I also engrave glass. I do high-speed rotary carving on wood. I make rugs. Two different ways of making rugs: latch hooks or a punch style. Sewing. I've got some perla type beads at the other side of the room. Cross stitch. What else? Probably lots of stuff. I just can't always bring them to mind. I'm doing that line there. Okay. Well, we have a pussycat that's just arrived in the studio. I'm hoping actually he doesn't decide to visit, just because it's hot, and I don't want to be trying to manage this with a cat around. So if he does decide to visit, the pyrography will stop until he either decides to go on his own way or we persuade him to do so. Okay, so actually talking about pussycats and things, we're just coming up to, it's almost to 10 o'clock now. I've just finished putting that line at the bottom right there, just so that that outlines in. There's another four lines to outline. But what I'm going to do is normally stop around about 10 o'clock, so having just completed that line, I think that's a good stopping point for tonight. So we'll well, I've turned the machine off, so that'll go cold in a moment. We'll do the other 4 lines tomorrow night, and then we can start to apply the shading. I might actually do some more detailing on the train as well first, before we apply the shading, but we'll see how that goes. But essentially that's it. We'll carry on with this tomorrow evening. Yeah, well, sorry, just reading chat. We'll carry on tomorrow evening, and so I just want to say thank you all for watching. If there's anybody who is watching and isn't following, then of course I do encourage you to do so. You'll get the notifications when I start streaming from Twitch. But on the other hand, if you don't trust it, or you just want a notification without following, then you can follow me on Twitter. It's @Zergonaut. The details for that are below the stream window. They're also going to be on the end plate in a moment, if you'd just like to try and catch me on my next stream, which will be tomorrow night at around 8 PM UK time, 1900 hours GMT. Or 2 hours ago it was 8 o'clock. So do the maths. And that time tomorrow night. Thank you all. It has been fun. Look forward to doing some more of this tomorrow, and see you all later. Bye bye.